Hey everybody! One of the puzzles that we're building for the Egypt game that's going to Anchorage is a maze cabinet in which the players will get a special tool or stylus and they will use that to trace a maze, which will then open the cabinet up to receive fabulous prizes. I've been working on this some for prototyping. This was kind of an early sketch proof of concept for where you'd run your piece through. You've probably seen these before from other various sources, but the difference on this one is that it's going to be on two different halves of the door, so that when you finish, the door opens up. That'll release the stylus and also give you your fabulous prize. And we're going to go over to the CNC machine and take a look at my third version of the test. And I just, before it became too late, found one of my problems with my order of operations. So let's go to the CNC machine. Here we are at the third version of my test for the maze and making sure everything's going to work. As you can see, I've abandoned the circular radial style maze in favor of a square one. Two reasons: the grid just is easier to design the maze on the grid, because on the radial one, the radiating lines going out when you got towards the center, they became very tight, and these gap areas became very, very small. So that might have been a stability issue. And also the circular one just didn't really work for an Egypt theme, maybe better for like a Mayan or an Aztec theme, just on the common geometry of their stuff. But anyway, this is the first time I have started doing a test for having the maze on separate halves of the door. And I was almost through cutting out this section before I realized that I'm about to mess up. So I've already done 2 of the 3 passes around the perimeter of this door before I realized that all of these pieces in here, the island ones, they were just going to crack right the hell off once that bit came through for the final pass. So for my order of operations, I'm going to have to pull these kind of security screws, lay another material over top, 3/8 or 1/2 inch material over top of that, and glue that, nail that down. That'll be the backer of the door, and then mill the whole thing out at once, which I am going to do right about now, and you can watch. Hopefully in a time lapse, because it's kind of slow. At some point during that time lapse, my trusty 23 gauge nail gun jammed up and quit firing, and rather than taking him apart now, I'm just going to switch to my other gun and keep going with this. So while I'm here, quick trick for you. When you have been firing and you run out of ammo and you don't realize that till 3 or 30, or in this case maybe upwards of 100 nails later that you stopped firing or were out of ammo, you still have all these little pock marks from the gun's hammer going forward. You can take some little magnets and just kind of gently, kind of dirty, run them over your where your holes were, and if it grabs, there actually was a nail there. So what it feels like is that none of these actually fired. Yep, none of them. So I'm going to go redo that and fix my gun, and then we'll get on to the remill on the doors. I'll see you on the other side of this tedium. So step number, whichever one that was a qualified success. A lot of these you've seen before. It'll start in the middle. We'll cheat there. We'll start in the middle, and there will be some kind of bolt or whatever, or rivet that has an actual key attached to it that you have to run out of the maze and eventually get through the top. On this one, we're going to go the opposite direction, and you're not actually getting a key. You're kind of using what we're calling the key, or stylus, which we're about to start milling at least a test version out of brass. We haven't done much lathe work, but we're gonna crack that back open. So we're gonna start at the top, run through the whole maze, and I'm satisfied that the maze is sufficiently complicated enough that even though I designed this, it still took me like 3 minutes to solve it, because well, it's fairly complicated. A couple little things on a lot of these. If you're just using the head of a bolt, you could cheat pretty easily in spaces like this, but with the stylus that we're going to mill in a moment here, that won't be possible, and it will also magnet that when you get it to the middle will hit a Hall effect sensor that will release the mag locks that will allow the door to open and give you back your key. So let's go play with the lathe. And one more quick thing before we get too far into milling out the stylus on the lathe. I'm going to take our little neodymium rare earth magnet and with my test array for the Hall effect sensor to see what our actual range is on this. I have just set up a quick setup for the Hall effect sensor, which you can't really see, but Hall effect sensor is right there. And when you bring the magnet in range, my light's turning on, so that's showing me my detection range. So it looks like it's right about a ½ inch. I'm on target here. Right about a ½ inch for my read range. And if I use a larger magnet, I get a little more, but it's not that appreciable. So I'm going to go with the smaller magnet because I can fit that into a smaller stylus. What we just spared you from having to watch was me dorking around with the mini lathe because I'm not very good at it, and we've had some friends in the shop using it. I won't name any names. Patrick. And my God, that thing was a little messed up, so I had to more or less take the thing apart, put it back together again to get all of the slop on every conceivable axis, mostly out of there. Also, most of our cutters are kind of garbage, so we're going to get some new, better cutters to make the real ones of these. I'll put some insert shots in here while I'm babbling. This one, we were started out, did pretty well, and then because of all the slop in the machine, we ended up breaking a cutter and causing some shatter and having to cut it down. So we lost the 3/4 inch or so material out of this piece that would have needed to give that the last little bit of 3/4 inch worth of handle it would have needed. So there's going to be a magnet in that little cup, and then you're going to run the maze with that, and when you get to the middle, it will trip the sensor and open the doors for aforementioned fabulous prizes. So now that we kind of know what we're doing, we're going to get some better cutters, and we can show you with a little less idiocy how to make these in the one step versus the way too many it took to get this demo piece. What this demo piece does let me do is kind of test run the maze to get me a good proof of concept on the rest of this before I start doing this on good material and burning more CNC time. And it works pretty well. The biggest problem is actually not with this guy, it's with the fact that I got lazy when I did this test piece, and I didn't sand out the back of it before I nailed on this 3/8. So there's a lot of just trash from the 3/4 plywood that's in spots, making it right there a little difficult to get through. And on the actual solve path, Mark just found out that when I was firing those nails through, one of them got a little stray and actually kind of went through. You can't see it, but it is just barely blocking the T-channel part of it. So there is a nail kind of through, just barely into one of those that's preventing him from going through. And also with the final, I'm going to look for some slightly larger end mill bits. So instead of using the ½ inch for this part and the 1/4 inch for this part, I'm going to see if I can find stuff that's end mill that's stepped up a 1/16 or go to metric and find whatever the next just 1 millimeter up equivalent is. So I'm going to be looking at our local stores, some Amazon, and some other online sources for those, and continue to work on the maze cabinet. So I've just faced this surface here, and now I'm going to kind of pre-pilot my center with a 90-degree V router bit. And that's about all that needs. Next, I'm using a relatively small drill bit to pilot out my hole a little deeper. And if there are any actual machinists watching this episode, please tell me what I'm doing wrong, because I know there's something. Someone, actually a lot of people, make, it's called a stub bit for doing just this, where you have the shorter bit to use for machining. We don't have any of those. All we had was the nice long jobber drill bits for a hand drill. So we actually cut about 2 inches worth of shank off of that to make it fit into our mini lathe in the space we actually had. So we have the chuck is kind of grabbing into the flutes, which is not ideal, but it's working. So this pocket that I'm cutting in the back of it now is going to be the one that'll actually hold the magnet. And I want to make it just deep enough to hold said magnet. It's hard to tell. 0.1. So yeah, I gotta cut a little deeper, I think. And I lost a magnet. I lost a magnet. Perfect. There we go. I got a finished product here that I have not done a lot of footage on. Between this being crunch week and just coming off of the holidays, we haven't had the camera rolling as much as we should have. So, ta-da! This is some next level stuff. To my knowledge, no one else has done anything quite like this. I could be wrong. I invite you to prove me wrong in the comments. Go. So on this one, we have the maze, and when you complete the maze, the doors open. Went through several prototypes on the actual maze face. So you have the maze itself is kind of a T-channel that will, you let the key will run through that, get to the end, and something will happen, and I'll get there. On making the face of this, for this actual finished one, I made it almost to the very end, and then there was a problem with my methods. They were unsound, and I destroyed the piece on the CNC machine, and it was sad. And around that time, this is quick side note here. When Mark and I are talking to each other, a lot of times we don't quite understand what the other is saying, but the person being talked to will actually think the other one has a better idea than they actually do. In this case, I was explaining what I was doing on this to Mark, and he thought my plan was way better than it was. So when it failed, he just said, "Oh, I thought you were going to do that." And I said, "That would have been way better." So on round 2, we went with that order of operations. Which I won't get too much into because it's kind of in the weeds and a little boring. But it worked. Go Mark. For the whole structure on this one, I went through and looked at a lot of actual Egyptian furniture, most of which, the surviving stuff, comes from King Tut's tomb. So this is kind of based off something, it's a piece I'm pretty sure came from Tut's tomb. It looks like this. Yeah, that was my inspiration. In final execution, this may be a little bit more kind of Gustav Stickley arts and crafts style, because that's what I like that style, and it's actually pretty close. So all of these pieces here, this is all solid, basically 2 inch by 2 inch mahogany, nice oak plywood for all of the body and the maze itself and the ankhs, which the ankhs aren't hand carved and gilded as the original one from Tut was, because, well, I don't have the wealth of a kingdom, and I do have a CNC machine. So we got the ankhs on there to tie it in with the rest of the theme. And I like it. The build went pretty quick on this one. As far as doing, very fine grade cabinet, permanent furniture, we cheated a little and used pocket screws instead of dowel sets and mortise and tenon and all of that, because no one's ever really going to know. Pocket screws. They're quick. They're great. If you don't know what they are, Google that after this. They're awesome. While we're talking about pocket screws, once you put them in there, Craig makes these little plugs that go in there. You get them hammered pretty much flush cut the rest of them off, and then sand them down to hide where your actual fasteners are. And yeah, it becomes a feature, not a flaw. It's all pretty oak end grain. Ooh. On this maze, the client said they wanted the maze cabinet, and this is pretty much the idea that appeared in my head. And one of the problems with a lot of these things is reset. So a lot of times your game masters, in order to reset the key, will have to run through the maze backwards, or there may be some kind of game master accessible lock on the side of it that apparently most game masters don't use. They just end up running the thing backwards through the maze anyway. So on this one, completing the puzzle gives you back your key, which is this little guy right here, which we turned out of brass. It's closed and I have to run it. If I can remember it, I wrote this thing, and there you go. So both these doors are held closed by a single mag lock, which is somewhat hidden back here. Got a good shot of that one. Now this isn't quite the full-on total hide that I would like it to be able to be, but I kind of took some of the idea off of the Thoth statue, who was in a video near this one, before, after, you'll see it. Where on that one, the mag lock is entirely hidden based on how the door works. So I didn't want to have the doors open and there is very obviously a mag lock just sitting right here, because that is the logical place to put a mag lock. Instead, the mag lock is, as you can see, off on the side, and there's this little bracket right here, which holds the door closed. And then with this door closed, the septum, which contains the actual brains, which is just mechanical on here, this door can't open either. For those guts, there is a little Hall effect sensor. You can kind of see some poking out right here to keep them centered, that will detect the magnet in the front of this guy. And I thought I could use just the Hall effect sensor to keep the mag lock engaged, because the logic kind of built in on this Hall effect sensor, its signal line is essentially always putting out the input voltage unless there's a magnet. So the magnet is kind of already the off switch. So I soldered up the whole thing. I had it ready to go. I had tested every individual component, and I put them all together, and it didn't work, and it was getting late. And this is actually shipping out later today, so I said a lot of four-letter words, and then tore it apart and figured out what was wrong. And then I went back and did what I should have done from the very beginning, actually check the data sheets. So the Hall effect sensor will basically allow a maximum amperage of, I believe it's 50 milliamps, and my, I think 80-pound mag lock here draws 60 milliamps. So those 10 milliamps, they mattered, because the power coming off through the Hall effect sensor was not enough to actually get the mag lock to engage. So I had to go through a transistor, which is also just kind of now hidden up in here, and it's hidden so you can't see it. Stop asking. There were so many parts of this that I really weren't sure were going to work, and there were some that didn't work until we fixed something. But mostly this idea was from what the client said, and I'm not even sure this is what he meant. This kind of came fully formed in my mind, and I'm really happy with the execution on this one. And I hope it shows up on camera to be as pretty as I think it is. Maze cabinet. I like it. I hope you do too. Stay tuned. We got lots more stuff coming.